Thank you so much, Kavita. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I'm told that I have missed some really good sessions. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Emma FLATT. She is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, and she is one of those very sought after and rare social historians of early modern South Asia. We are always looking for people working on social history of early modern South Asia, which is so dominated by economic histories. So she has worked from the 14th to the 17th centuries on court societies in general, on gardens, landscapes, environment. And I really very much look forward to hear her speak today and introduce her work so that we can have a nice discussion after that. Thank you. Emma.
So first of all, I just, of course, want to thank everyone, Renuji for inviting me, Kavita also for inviting me, Anuba, who has dealt with the most problematic, most difficult person to get here of all. So thank you, Anuba, for getting me here. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm absolutely terrified to speak after such wonderful papers. So I will do my best. I'm not an art historian. My PowerPoint is embarrassingly bad, so please ignore. So, I should just point out, whoops, I've added a little bit to my title, Foreign Fragrances, Plebeian Stinks, and Magical Aromas. I added in the foreign fragrances because I realized plebeian stinks and magical aromas might be slightly off-putting just after tea. It is incumbent that all created beings, particularly the followers of the Prophet, use perfumes and share them with one another. So wrote Nizamuddin Mahmud, or Tabin, as he was more familiarly known, in the introduction to the treatise on perfumes that he dedicated to Ibrahim Adil Shah II in the early 17th century. Such a statement provides a key to understanding the importance of olfactory history in pre-modern India. Unlike today, where perfumes were not a matter of mere aesthetic adornment, but rather played a crucial transactional role in the networked courtly societies of the day. This injunction with which Tabin starts his treatise, to share perfumes with one another, highlights the social capital of this material substance and opens the door to a dense semiotic world where smells, odors, and fragrances, alone or in combination, carry cultural meanings beyond their olfactory essence. In this paper, I'm going to try and deconstruct the cultural construction of the sense of smell in the pre-modern Deccan, and to highlight the role that odors and fragrances played in constructing or reifying social distinctions, as well as in stimulating alliances and sociability. Reading Persian chronicles in the deodorized and climate-controlled archives of modern libraries, as I tend to do, it's very easy to forget how pervasive a presence smell had in pre-modern India. Oddly, if we, or maybe I, spare a thought for the olfactory environment of the past, our imagination probably tends towards odor rather than fragrance, informed as much by the olfactory hazards of visits to neglected architectural remains, now used as public lavatories, as by those scholarly and popular histories of Europe that emphasize the stink of the pre-modern past. If we think at all about elite environments, we probably instinctively conceive of them as places characterized by the absence of smell, rather like elite or privileged environments today, this very auditorium, for example, or at most with a refined, restrained, delicate floral smell, rather like the lobbies of five-star hotels. Even the ubiquitous presence, long noted by art historians, of vases, bowls, incense burners, vials, and flasks set before the Sultan in the 16th and 17th century miniature paintings somehow fails to really conjure up a clear impression of overwhelming olfactory stimuli. And had I arrived in India earlier, I would have brought some perfumes to perfume this great auditorium with to give you a bit more of a sense, but you'll just have to imagine them. However, the senses of contemporary visitors to those courts were much more immediately assaulted. The Portuguese physician Garcia de Horta, who was a regular visitor to the court of Ahmednagar, described how the floors of Deccan palaces were covered with strong-smelling champa and roses all night and for much of the day. A recipe book from the neighboring sultanate of Malwa complicates, however, this seemingly simple olfactory smellscape by describing how the palace walls should be rubbed with a perfumed paste, known as abir, whose smell had been enhanced by the addition of just 1 or 2 ingredients. Are you ready? Add mango, ambergris, beans, marhati aloes, perfumed fat, bruised grains, chova, which is a paste of 4 ingredients, sandal, agalocham, saffron and musk, essence of mouse ear plant, Chinese camphor, boiled juice of spikenard, and put in flowers scented with aloes, white sandal essence, scents from shoots, sesame oil scent, sweet basil essence, champa essence, artemisia essence, turmeric leaves essence, sacred basil essence, cardamom juice, sandal juice. And as if this were not enough olfactory stimulation for the sultans, this is just a paste to rub on the walls. An illustration from this same manuscript demonstrates a perfumed palace. And it shows a comfortable throne in the center of a floor strewn with flowers, while incense and scented candles burn by the side of trays, perfume pans, trays of flowers, perfume pans, bottles of perfume, and chalices, probably holding perfumed waters and unguents. So this is a normal courtly setting. Our surprise at this sensory overload, this perfuming of a perfume, if you like, should alert us to the historicity of the sense of smell as something that is culturally constructed in specific circumstances, rather than an unchanging universal fact. And in fact, I was struck by seeing Mittal Saab's wonderful perfume bottles, and the fact that one of them was a fish. Now, I don't know how many of you know the proverb that after 3 days, visitors and fish begin to stink. But associating fish with perfume is not something that would immediately jump to my European mind. Of course, we all know that the Deccan has other connections with fish, but I just found it was a very interesting way of thinking about how smell and what symbolizes a beautiful scent is so culturally specific. Even contemporary observers in medieval India recognized the cultural specificity of smells. He noted that he did not share the Indians' passion for the gum asafoetida, which he described as the nastiest smell in the world. Da Horta added, "The truth is that there is a great deal of habit in the matter of smells. For instance, the betel, that which these people are constantly chewing, has a very nice smell to those who use it, and to me, a very nasty one." So, a lot of my work is inspired by the great French cultural historian Alain Corbin. And as he has shown, good and bad smells change very much over time and space in a way that is intimately connected to broader socio-political and cultural trends, ideas of science, and understandings of the human body. So, what was a good smell and a bad smell in the medieval Deccan? Recent work on the history of musk in the Middle East has convincingly shown that the pride of place that musk took in Islamic olfactory hierarchies. Musk was certainly well regarded in the medieval Deccan, as references to it in contemporary poetry and prose suggest. However, as the earlier description I just read you, even though it comes from Malwa, I would argue it is very much prevalent also in the Deccan. This earlier description suggests the best smells in Sultanate India seem to have been complex compounds of substances of animal, plant, and mineral origin. Persian poetry, including that written in the Deccan, prized floral scents, most notably the rose and the jasmine. But it is worth noting that both plants and gardens were frequently also described by references to animal substances, particularly musks, as if their floral perfume was somehow inadequate without the addition of animal simples. And I think this is rather this idea is an olfactory corollary to Sylvia's remarks earlier about the monstrous flowers on the plants and the comments she made about the wakwak tree. The Ahmadnagar poet Zuhuri, for example, describes roses and jasmine buds with the word pod, a word which is inextricably linked to the idea of the glands of the male musk deer, and that's how you describe the musk, is by this word pod. And he underlines this meaning by mentioning in his poem Kutan, a place which is renowned for fragrant musk. And he says, "Moreover, it is the time of the perfume seller for the rosebed. Each bud is pregnant with 100 pods. From the perfume seller comes the pod of jasmine. the zephyr has drawn the caravan to the country of Kutan. There's some really interesting gender stuff going on here. A male musk deer is the bud, which is pregnant with the pod of the male musk deers, is very interesting, but let's not go into that now. Tabin's early 17th century perfume manual, the one dedicated to Ibrahim Adil Shah, divides the raw ingredients of perfumes into odoriferous plants, animals, and vegetables, but every single one of his recipes are compounds. And all of his compounds contain musk, amber, aloe, and camphor. So that is to say, every single one of his compounds contain a combination of both animal and vegetal simples. Moreover, even before these simples are ready to be used in compounds, they must undergo some further type of preparation, which generally involves dressing, marinating, infusing, or cooking the animal or vegetal simple with the other olfactants. Directions for perfuming a woman's body show a similar concern to create a highly complex mix of smells. This again I've taken from the Nimatnama. Rub perfume separately into each joint. Use pellets of perfume paste. Wash the hands in rose water. Take the sap from the back of the mango tree and from the bark of the wild fig tree and from the peepal tree and wash the body with it. Rub aromatic paste, perfume, and musk into the armpits. Rub chova, rosewater, and musk onto the private parts, and rub sandal on the throat. Essence of musk is good for the mouth. Also put aloes perfume into the mouth. Rub ointment made from bodily oils on the face. Rub rosewater on the forehead. Sniff flowers. Scatter spikenard on the head. Rub saffron on the face. Use scented flower oils of every kind. Make a beard with the sweet scent of jasmine flowers. Polish the 2 front teeth. Rub perfume into the handkerchief. Wash the whole body with rosewater. Put on a white shadow and apply scent to it. Just in case there wasn't enough. So what do? How do we try and understand such a bewilderingly varied olfactory palette? Perfume-making manuals, of course, are courtly elite manuscripts, intended for the use of the sultan, like this Bijapuri text, and his circle of courtiers. South Asian courts were centers of conspicuous consumption, where the best, the rarest, and the most extravagant of luxury items were purchased, displayed, and consumed. Many of these commodities, particularly olfactants, were important through long-distance trade networks. And Omana, in fact, did a lot of that with her brilliant connections between Timor-Leste and the Deccan. She's laid out a lot of my work for me, so thank you, Omana. These long-distance trade networks which linked the subcontinent to China, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. In a 15th century Telugu poem, a powerful merchant family operating out of Nellore, in present-day Andhra, is praised for their ships which arrive from Burma, Goa, Sumatra, and East Africa, laden with musk, saffron powder, camphor, civet oil, various different kinds of sandalwood, aloes wood, and rosewater. And the perfume says, Avachittipa is the greatest of the Vaishya class. His skill in bringing abundant goods in boats and ocean ships from Tenasserim, Tavoy, Goa, and other charming places. Tenasserim and Tavoy are in Burma. They come laden with sandal and superior sandal, camphor and himambu sandal, saffron and silvery musk. Can such a man be insignificant in this world? Now, he's a merchant, but the way he's described in this particular poem is extremely courtly and in some ways almost extremely royal. And I've discussed that elsewhere, so I won't go into that today. Now, states frequently established a monopoly on both the purchase and the production of luxury goods, including olfactants. Firuz Bahmani launched a campaign against one of the nearby Reddy rulers to enforce his monopoly over the goods bought by long-distance traders. One observer claimed the production of roses and champa flowers was a state monopoly at Vijayanagar, which generated a substantial state revenue through the purchase of flowers as tribute for the king. Even when such monopolies were not imposed, the cost of such luxurious items like olfactants effectively restricted their usage to the wealthiest. So the extravagant simultaneous use of multiple luxurious olfactants in the recipes described above therefore clearly demonstrated the individual's wealth and standing. Okay, you would expect that. From at least the 15th century, the courtly societies of the Deccani sultanates, as is well known, were networks of courtiers from a wide variety of ethnicities. Indians, Iranians, Iraqis, Turanians, Central Asians, Arabs, Abyssinians, and of course Europeans, and were frequently destabilized by factional conflicts between groups which coalesced around charismatic figures, often, although not always, on the basis of ethnic origin. In this fragmented and fluid situation, distinguishing oneself amongst one's peers was vital in order to succeed at court. Unsurprisingly, therefore, perfumes became a useful tool by which an individual could stand out. We get a sense of this through a series of brief but recurring comments in the Itri Naura Shahi, variants on the well-known Persian phrase, "Ajaib o garibi khachud." It will be wonderful and it will be wonderful and strange, or it will smell marvelous and foreign. It is something new and strange, a strange and marvelous smell. It gives a wonderful and strange energy to the soul. So the best perfume, therefore, should evoke wonder and novelty. But above all, it should evoke a sense of strangeness, an unfamiliar fragrance with unrecognizable origins. The desire for unfamiliarity suggests one reason for the heterogeneous olfactory palette blended into Tarbin's perfume recipes. An application of one fragrance simple was familiar and could easily be recognized, even by an untrained nose, whereas Tarbin's compounds would confound even the connoisseurs and elevate the user above his courtly peers in both his skill at perfume blending and his access to costly ingredients. But the question we really have to ask is, why was strangeness so prized? Now, it would be easy to say, well, everyone always likes the exotic. They've been frequently admired in diverse aesthetic regimes throughout history. And yet, again, we need to historicize this admiration. For the contemporary readers, the word ajab, or ajib, conjured up a particular genre of texts, the ones that Sylvia was talking about earlier today, the ajaib o makhlukat, wonders and marvels texts, books which aimed to inspire wonder about creation, in order to lead the reader to contemplation of the power and the magnificence of the Creator. Now, recent scholarly work on this genre, and I have to say it's one of the most underworked on genres that I've come across, the Ajaib al-Makhlukat text, given that it's so prevalent and so amazingly illustrated. I'm amazed nobody really seems to be working on them apart from Persis Bilkam. Maybe there are people I don't know of. So recent scholarly work suggests that by the late 14th century, there was a shift in emphasis in this particular genre. You start with a focus on the brilliance of the cosmic power and just wondering at the marvel of the Creator. But the focus by the 14th century has actually changed to focus on the active role of humans in their relationship with the natural world, especially on their ability to manipulate that world through the inclusion of talismans, spells, and so on. So in this context, then, Tarbin's concern to manipulate the original smell of an animal or a vegetal simple through marinating, dressing, and soaking it in other perfumes, before mixing these simples all together with other simples into a complex compound, takes on a more philosophical meaning, suggesting the potential for the humans to manipulate the natural world, and therefore, by analogy, the cosmic order, to their own advantage. But there's something else I want to just bring out about this particular cultural valence given to foreignness, or rather strangeness, and that's the word gharibi, which I have translated thus far as strangeness. But of course, as is well known, it can also mean foreignness. And it has a specific local import in the medieval Deccan sultanates, where factional strife often mapped onto ethnic identity. Gharibi, or foreignness, had a particular political valence there. Gharibi is commonly used by contemporaries in Ahmednagar and Bijapur, and is applied retrospectively to histories of their Bahmani predecessors, to refer to the political faction largely made up of immigrants from the Persian Gulf, who were frequently engaged in violent strife with a rival Deccan faction. So therefore, could we suggest that by use of this term gharibi, is Tarbin trying to make advocate his recipes on the basis of their ability to make you smell like a member of a particular faction? Bit of a simplistic assumption, you might think. Particularly because Tarbin's patron, Ibrahim Adil Shah, was renowned for prizing the local Indian cultural environment above the Persianate culture. On the other hand, however, like most of his predecessors and contemporaries, Ibrahim was never clearly aligned with just one single faction. He spent much of the early years of his reign trying to wrest back control from a series of regents who were generally associated with the Deccan factions, many of whom were Abyssinians. So really, we need to historically contextualize the use of gharibi in the Deccan texts before we can make any firm conclusions about this. But the important point that I want to draw from this is to think about how Tabin's book really reminds us to consider how factional political contexts may have spilled over into the realms of aesthetics and material culture. And so often we focus on art or aesthetics as this kind of hermetically sealed world that is somehow unaffected by political factional conflicts. And I would argue that really it isn't. Indeed, the very title of the book, the Itari Nauras Shahi, and the form of the book, which is 9 chapters, each of 9 so-called nauras, or sections, demonstrates the book's connection with the widespread courtly fascination with the idea of nauras that we've heard so much about so far, of Ibrahim Adil Shah's time. Now, I'm not going to talk about that aspect of this treatise. I think Ali will probably have a lot more to say about that than I do. But I just want to kind of forefront that. But of course, the history of smell is not purely about pleasant fragrances. Here we get to the good bit. Equally important is the history of odors and stinks and the methods undertaken to banish foul smells. The nature and purpose of Persian chronicles and courtly literature doesn't really allow us to look at something like urban stinks, as has been done for early modern France, for example. So we can't really try and reconstruct the civic history of the medieval Deccan by looking at the nature of urban stinks. But how do we therefore recover the histories of odors, sensations which by their very nature are ephemeral, leave no material trace, and are themselves whitewashed out of any beautiful aesthetic, pictorial or visual reconstruction? Well, fortunately, we do have some sources about some of the anxieties felt about people, and those anxieties tend to focus on their own bodily smells or the smells of others. One of the most commonly mentioned concerns in contemporary materials was bad breath. Anxiety surrounding one's bad breath had a long history in Islamic societies. There's a very common hadith which seeks to reassure the faithful that God finds the breath of a fasting believer sweeter than musk. However, other less pious causes of halitosis were more problematic. There are other hadiths which record the Prophet's strong dislike of garlic and his warning to those who had eaten it to stay away from the mosque until the smell had gone from their breath. Other hadiths explain, no, it's not the Prophet who doesn't like garlic, it was the angels, and that the Prophet had refrained from eating it in order to ensure that Jibreel would continue to visit him with revelations from God. Nevertheless, the Prophet explicitly declared garlic was not forbidden to Muslims. We see a similar ambivalence towards garlic in Indic works. Physicians valued it for its powerful remedial properties. These include promoting hair growth, healing fractures, improving sight, increasing strength and appetite, curing urinary disorders, and above all, stimulating the production of semen, and thus serving as an aphrodisiac. Perhaps because of this last characteristic, garlic is taboo among many religious communities. The Brahmins and the Jains are 2 obvious examples. Others derive the taboo from a more unexpected source. There's a common belief that garlic originated from several drops of fluid that fell from the severed windpipe of the king of the demons. There's also ambiguity towards garlic in Sultanate India. Garlic is much less common in contemporary recipes than the modern-day habits of Indian cooking might lead us to assume. When I was taught to cook when I was doing my PhD fieldwork here, I was always told, just start with ginger garlic, ginger garlic, ginger garlic. And if you look at contemporary recipe books, the ginger garlic thing just isn't there. It's not the common base that I was taught it always should be. Its aphrodisiacal qualities are appreciated in courtly texts, but these appear to be overshadowed by fears of the bad breath that it causes. Contemporary perfume manuals and recipe books provide remedies specifically recommended for the bad breath caused by eating garlic. These range from the use of simples like zedori and cloves, to compounds like abir, to recipes for mouth fresheners, mukhbas, and for perfumed pan. But bad breath was not merely antisocial. A strong tradition in Islamic societies connected the smell of bad breath with the smell of sin. A common story found in various Arabic and Persian versions describes how a group of travelers catch and eat a baby elephant, despite the warnings of one of their companions. The mother elephant then arrives and sniffs the mouths of the group, killing all but the one man who had refused to eat the baby. In the retelling of this story by the mystic poet Rumi, the smell of the men's breath was an indicator of their greed, an odor that could be smelt not only by the mother elephant, but also by the prophet, an odor that had ascended to heaven and would be noted by the examiners in the celestial sphere. Indeed, Rumi continues, the scent of a liar's breath will contradict his pious proclamations, and his prayers will always be ignored on that account. So bad breath, therefore, has connotations of immorality as well as hypocrisy. So how do you get rid of bad breath in an era before the rise of Colgate? Well, mouth fresher. And in India, what better than a perfume pan? Now, various scholars before me have remarked on the political symbolism of gifting and accepting pan in medieval India. What I want to look at here is the olfactory characteristics of pan and the use of olfactants in general to facilitate social interaction by virtue of their smells. The Portuguese physician Garcia da Horta, who, as I've mentioned, spent time at the Ahmednagar court in the 1540s, notes that when men have to go to have an interview with some persons of quality, they approach chewing pan in their mouths so as to give out a pleasant scent. Among these people, it is so detested to smell bad or musty that common people put their hands before their mouths so as not to give out an unpleasant smell when in the presence of a person in authority. Similarly, the author of the Nimatnama argues that pan has social as well as medicinal benefits. It produces well-being and desire. It gets rid of halitosis. It induces intelligent talk and produces an appetite for food. The libido is strengthened, desire is awakened, and erections are induced. And here you can see a situation. Desire, serenity, intelligent talk, and an appetite for food and sex. Just the ingredients, it would seem, for a courtly majlis, or an intimate encounter, such as this one illustrated up here. Just the sort of situations where bad breath could result in severe humiliation at the hands of one's peers, rivals, or lovers. The social anxiety provoked by bad breath in these intimate situations is perfectly captured in a story in Sa'di's 13th century work of moral tales, the Bustan, in which the Abbasid Caliph Mahmud is spurned by a slave girl because of his atrociously bad breath. Enraged by this refusal of his sexual advances, he threatens to kill her. To which she replies that instant death would be better than the slow, painful death she is currently suffering, breath by breath from the odor of his mouth. Mamun is not impressed. He sulks for a while, but he takes the remedy, grew sweet-smelling like a bud, and finally made the slave girl his boon companion in recognition of her frankness in pointing out his faults. Now, Sa'di is clearly making a point about good rulership here, but his analogy is effective because it relies on persistent bodily anxieties about betrayal by one's own breath. What Da Horta's discussion of the use of pan also implies is that bad breath was not just a breach of social etiquette, but also an indicator of class status. Clearly, as luxury goods imported from distant lands and frequently subject to state monopolies, many olfactants, including musk, ambergris, camphor, clove, nutmeg, and cardamom, would have been unaffordable to all but the wealthiest. Bad odor, therefore, is a signifier of poverty and low status. Moreover, a very strong trend within Islamic thought rationalized the existence of social inequality by arguing that individual souls differed in quality, and the aspirations of each man would be appropriate to his God-given rank in life. So therefore, to smell bad was tantamount to admitting your own limited abilities and intelligence. Certain ethnic groups in the Deccan were regularly said to possess particularly unpleasant odors, most frequently the Habshis, the Africans. Africans constituted a significant faction in the courts of the medieval Deccan, acquired as slaves in the slave markets of the Arabian Peninsula and trained in either the military or domestic establishments of the Sultanate courts. Many subsequently rose to important positions and took service under the sultans once they had been freed, identifying themselves largely with the Deccani factions at court. At the end of the 16th century, the African faction was particularly powerful at both the Ahmednagar court, as is well known, we all know about Malik Ambar, for example, but also at the Bijapur courts, particularly during the regency of Ibrahim Adil Shah. So, coming back to my point about the political nature of this kind of text, who are the people who are said to smell bad in the Itri Naura Shahi? It's the Africans. Who are the people who Ibrahim has been struggling to get out of the grip of? The Habshi regents. I would say it's not necessarily a coincidence. Contemporary works provide many recipes for perfumes to remove the smell of those from the country of Habash. Another olfactory treatment is recommended in order to remove pain in the loins caused by copulation with Habshis and Zangis, Africans. Earlier texts, such as the account of the 9th century Arabic author Al-Jahiz, also make reference to the peculiar odor associated with eunuchs, who were frequently Africans, which is attributed to the fetidness of their sweat. Again, another marker of low status. Militating against this association between odor and African slaves, on the other hand, was the tendency for Africans in medieval Indian courts to be named after pleasant-smelling olfactants. The most famous of these is, of course, the Ahmednagar vizier Malak Ambar, named after ambergris, which is incidentally an olfactory substance excreted by sperm whales. But Persian chronicles and inscriptions speak also of Malik sandalwood, Malik karamful, clove, Malik rehan, sweet basil, and Malik kushnud. That could mean contented, but it could also mean sweet mulberry. African slaves were also named after other valuable items. We have dinar, or gold coin, johar, jewel, yakut, emerald, or even cheetah. So this naming policy may simply have been a way in which the masters tried to signify the monetary value, or their monetary value, through a comparison to other prized luxury goods. Alternatively, however, the practice of bestowing olfactory names on slaves may have been an example of antiphrasis, the most celebrated instance of which actually comes from the 10th century Egypt. The 10th century ruler was known as Abu al-Mishk Kafur al-Ishkindi. His name, which means the father of musk, Camphor al-Ishkidi, contrasted the true characteristics of camphor, white and fragrant, with Kafur, the black eunuch, proverbially noisome and malodorous, who's immortalized in contemporary poetry for his powerful farts. So what is smell thought to do? What we need to do then is to begin to think about the ways in which smells in Islamic India were thought to act on the person smelling them. And if we do this, we begin to see that naming patterns seem to point to a deeper meaning than the slave's economic worth or his master's cruel sense of humor. What we're dealing with here is a particular philosophical conception of the work of olfactory substances that goes far beyond modern-day conceptions of smells as essentially aesthetic matters to be enhanced, disguised, or banished. In both Ayurvedic and Unani medicine, olfactants were considered drugs and played as important a part in medical cures as they did in aesthetic regimes. The word itar, frequently translated narrowly as perfume, often denotes both spices and medicinals in pre-modern materials. And pre-modern perfume-making manuals can frequently overlap with medical texts in detailing the medical benefits of a particular olfactant. As Perso-Arabic medical thought was based on the humoral system, the body and everything consumed by it, including food, drink, perfumes, medicines, were all classified in terms of their humoral properties, whether they were cold, hot, dry, or wet. Disease was caused by an imbalance, which could only be rectified by the consumption of something with the opposite properties. Emotions, too, were understood to be caused by particular adjustments in bodily humors, and could thus be manipulated by the application of particular substances with the right humoral characteristics. Now, perfumes were particularly well placed to do this, for as one text argued, there was Malik Ambar, a sweet scent is the nourishment of the spirit, and the spirit is the instrument of the faculties, and the faculties increase with scent. For it is beneficial for brain and heart and the other internal organs, and makes the heart rejoice, pleases the soul, and revitalizes the spirit. It is truest of all for the spirit, and the most suitable for it, for there is a close relationship between scent and the good spirit. Now, according to the physician Ibn Sina, certain fragrances or exhilarants would act physiologically upon the heart, causing it to expand with direct ameliorating consequences for both the emotional state of a person and for their physical health. Smells, particularly good smells, had therefore a transformative effect on humans. And we can see how pervasive this attitude was if we look at this description of a garden written in the medieval Deccani Sultanate of Ahmednagar. And in truth, the garden and the building was so heart-expanding and joy-bestowing. The guile of the pictures of Mani found life from the delicacy of its spirit-increasing air. The spirit-increasing fragrant breeze bestowed equilibrium. The blossom-scented air and the abir-scented odor of its laka laka is the grief of the pod of Tatari musk. Here, the garden, like an exhilarant, expands the heart and changes the mood of the visitor, bestowing joy. Since emotions were thought to be caused by particular adjustments in bodily humors, the garden, and by implication its fragrance, is actually working on the physical body of the visitor. The fragrant garden breeze induces a state of ittadal, or equilibrium, the condition when bodily humors were in perfect balance. So against the background of these philosophical, medicinal, and aesthetic traditions in which fragrances and even fragrant metaphors were considered to have such a powerful agency, the olfactory names bestowed on slaves takes on a more dynamic role, potentially transforming their owner's intellectual and ethical capacity. As we have seen, odors and stinks were associated not only with low status, certain ethnic groups and occupations, but also with a lack of intelligence, hypocrisy, and sinfulness. Fragrances, on the other hand, were overwhelmingly associated with morality, beauty, and health. That this naming policy, the tradition of giving olfactory names to slaves, may have been linked to the olfactory dimension of intelligence and ability is supported by a hadith. This hadith is transmitted by Jafar Siddiq. And he says, the messenger of God said, as soon as the scent of a bondman becomes pleasant, his intelligence increases. Training or nurturing a slave in the family home was a crucial step in developing those unique bonds of loyalty, which underpin the logic of slavery as an institution. In this hadith, perfuming is a precondition for an increase in intelligence. And as we have seen, perfume is indeed thought to act on both the heart and the mind of the smeller. In this context, a series of images in the Nimatnama, in which the Sultan directs slave women of various ethnic origins in the making of perfumes, assumes another layer of meaning. If wearing perfume and smelling fragrances has such a transformational potential over the body and the mind of the wearer, might we not assume that the process of making perfumes is also a transformative experience? So these images, which are quite famous from the Nimatnama, show the Sultan overseeing his slave women who are in the process of making a whole series of named perfumes. So perhaps by being key actors in the making of perfume, these slaves were also subjecting their minds and their bodies to a type of education, both literally in the perfection of a new skill under the direction of their master, and symbolically in the sense of becoming perfumed or more intelligent. This strikingly transformative power of olfactants was not restricted to human bodies, but exerted a similarly powerful force over the bodies of spiritual beings. The use of perfumes and aromatics seems to have been an integral part of magical rituals in many cultures. Indic as well as Islamic rituals for dispersing evil spirits involve burning foul-smelling objects, including hair, eggshells, and sulfur. Ayurvedic remedies for possession, epilepsy, and madness instructed the doctor to fumigate the patient with various foul substances. There's a festival that was celebrated in Khwarazm, where people used perfumes and incense as a means of warding off spirits and evil beings. In an 11th century account of the enmity between jinns and humans, a senior jinn laments the way in which humans torture them with unbearable fumes. On the other hand, perfumes and fragrances were widely believed to have a particular fascination for certain types of spirits. The 14th century jurist and physician Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah explained that perfume has this special characteristics, that the angels like it, but the demons flee from it, for what the demons like best is an unpleasant, putrid smell. Good spirits love a beautiful scent, while evil spirits like an evil smell. Every spirit is attracted to what is suitable to it. Evil females to evil males, and the reverse. This also includes words and deeds, food and drink, clothing and scents. So perfume was thought to have a similar physiological effect on jinns to the effect it had on humans. A Moroccan writer explained that the jinns respond to perfumes because they are nourished by the perfume smoke. And the influence was stronger on jinns than it was on humans because, according to Islamic tradition, jinns were created from smokeless fire. So the idea of jinns taking nourishment from perfumed smoke posits a correspondence between their physical nature and their sustenance. So if we just look back for a minute at that description I read a minute ago about the Deccani Farah Baksh garden in Ahmednagar, it is very clear here also that the fragrances produced are so incomparable that they begin to alter the rightful nature of the universe, producing magical effects. The fabled pictures of Mani are magically brought to life by the spirit-increasing quality of the air, and emotions are stirred even in an inanimate object like the pod of Tatari musk. Similarly, in magic spells, perfumes become agents capable of conjuring spirits out of the air, rather than mere atmospheric accessories. Okay. So consequently, olfactory items were an essential element in many spells used for spirit invocation. The 11th century Ghayat al-Hakim contains a series of spells on the drawing down of the planets, which rely heavily on what have been called suffumigants, aromatic compounds burned in order to summon each planet. The 14th century author Ibn al-Hajj al-Tilamsani lists the 15 most effective perfumes for magical rituals. When mixed together, these 15 perfumes are said to be so powerful that a sorcerer can merely throw a little bit of the mix into the fire at the correct hour of the night, and a powerful jinn will appear to do his bidding, without the need for any further conjuration. A 16th century astrological encyclopedia written by the Bijapur Sultan Ali Adil Shah, known as the Nujum al-Ulum, similarly emphasizes the importance of perfumes in both the making of talismans and the invoking of spirits. The sorcerer is instructed to sense specific amulets with particular vapors and fumes at particular times of the day, and to prepare various perfume compounds to be burnt during the invocation of planets, angels, and jinns. While many of the spells for conjuring spirits are immensely complex, I want to look at a series of 5 spells, which are each intended to conjure one of the children of the heart-ravishing Huris, a family of 5 jinn sisters, which are surprisingly straightforward. So a close examination of these 5 spells immediately reveals the key roles that aromatics play in conjuration. What you do is this. On the correct weekday, depending on which jinn sister you wish to conjure up, you break your fast. You draw a circle out of the relevant materials. You draw a circle on the floor, and the word used here is mandala. The sorcerer is directed to place a specific number of spices in the circle. The required spices are similar for each jinn. Areca nuts, nutmeg, cardamom, cloves, as well as some coins or seals, and some type of leaves, and that's not specified. Although the precise quantity that you lay out differs according to which jinn is to be summoned. None of the spells specify whether the sorcerer is expected to prepare the spices through grinding, mixing, or burning, as is common in other spells, although it does say that the spells do instruct the burning of additional olfactants, including aloe, itr, or the lighting of a lamp of either animal fat or sesame oil. So in the absence of instructions to the contrary, and using the illustrations as a guide, this is an illustration from the 16th century version of the Nujum, and this is from the 17th century. I apologize they're not in color, but they're such uninteresting to art historian pictures that I assumed that I could get away with black and white, because, they're not seen as beautiful objects, these 2 pictures. So what you can see here is that the later version of the Nujum manuscript, actually the 17th century version, has a more complete version of these spells. They're missing from the earlier manuscript. But the illustrator here has taken great pains to depict the cloves. You can see them all laid out there like little nails. Having laid out the spices, the sorcerer should sit in the circle, recite a spell in Arabic, and hey presto, the desired jinn will appear. Now, in terms, if we go back to the quantity and ratio at least, the key ingredients in these 5 spells seem to be cloves. And you can see that the first one, 8 cloves, 9 cloves, 20 cloves, 20 cloves, 48 cloves. The prominence accorded to cloves seems to be fairly unusual. It is not considered one of the principal aromatics in perfume manuals from the Deccan. It's generally seen as an optional variation rather than an essential ingredient in any recipe. This lack of interest in cloves, or the general lack of interest in cloves, may have been on account of their somewhat overpowering pungency. Anyone who's ever tried to bake with more than the recommended amount of cloves knows what I'm talking about. Or it may also have been related to their comparative rarity and consequent expense. But the choice of cloves as a prominent spice in these Deccan spells is not merely a matter of prestige. The most common uses of cloves in the surviving medical, gastronomical, and perfumery texts from this period show that it was prized above all for its aphrodisiacal qualities. In the Itri Nauruz Shahi, clove is recommended as a fortifier for a cold brain, an exhilarant for the heart, and a sweetener for the breath. Mixed with human breast milk and drunk, it is said to increase lust and semen and to strengthen the genitalia. A medieval Hindavi text describes a recipe for clove powder as a cure for gonorrhea and recommends rubbing it on the penis as a stimulant. The aphrodisiac tendencies of clove are underlined in the Itri Nauruz Shahi's recommendations for its use in perfuming the bedroom and in a whole series of recipes for removing bad breath through mouth freshener, perfume d'oreca, and pan. But the thing I want to point out also here is not just the prominence of clove. If we look at the ensemble of spices used in the spells to summon His, Arkik, and Zanak particularly, so His is the second, third, and fourth, they seem to resemble the ingredients for a pan: areca nut, cardamom, clove, and leaves. And I would make the argument, I think this image might bear me out, that these leaves are probably pan leaves. Or betel leaves, rather, sorry. As we saw above, pan too was known to have aphrodisiac qualities. Like the olfactants used, the 5 Jinn sisters were associated with social and physical intimacy. They're described generically as the daughters of the Huris, who of course are the virgins of paradise, with whom later exegetical texts promised the pious, frequent, and passionate sex. These Jinn were clearly thought to take corporeal form when conjured by the sorcerer. One spell used to conjure the Jinn sister Turkik contains strong warnings to the sorcerer neither to fall in love with Turkik nor to consider fornication with her. The reader is warned that 1,000 men have failed to gain Turkik's love, and those who have once fornicated with her are no longer able to consummate relationships with mortal women. Clearly, through the medium of conjuration and the potent transformative power of aromatics, Turkik takes on a bodily form, which, if not entirely identical to a human body, as the implication of its power to cause terminal impotency suggests, arouses a dangerously powerful lust amongst men. Moreover, Turkik's body, summoned into being by the assemblage of powerful olfactants, may have more than a passing resemblance to this transformative olfactory material. A tradition recorded in a 10th century eschatological handbook explains that God created the Huri's bodies from saffron and musk, ambergris and camphor, their hair from cloves, from the toes of their feet to their knees of saffron, from their knees to their hands of musk, from their hands to their necks of ambergris, and from their necks to their heads of camphor. Were the dark-eyed maidens to spit into the world would become musk. So this corporeal identification of the Huris with some of the most precious aromatics, many of which, including cloves, are thought to have aphrodisiacal properties, make it reasonable to assume that these Jinn sisters, known as the daughter of the Huris, might have inherited some, if not all, of the bodily characteristics of their mothers, and thus might be considered to be nourished by the fragrant smell of cloves to such an extent that they could be summoned and take physical form in front of the sorcerer. And once there, like the Huris, would dedicate themselves to fulfilling the desires, both social and sexual, of the master of invocations. So in this paper, I've tried to analyze the cultural construction of the sense of smell in the Sultanate Deccan. I've discussed the particular fascination with complex compound fragrance, which signaled unfamiliarity and foreignness. I've examined ways in which smells could signify status, ethnic groups, intelligence, and morality, and the ways in which one could manipulate these categories by the judicious use of appropriate olfactants. Finally, I have discussed the use of olfactants, as we've just seen, in magical spells. And throughout, I've tried to highlight the persistent belief in the transformative powers of particular olfactory objects over the bodies of humans and of jinns. By the correct mobilization of the right ingredients, the body and its capacities can be manipulated, enhanced, and summoned, and the cosmos can be rearranged. Given such a powerful belief, therefore, perhaps it's time modern scholars paid a little more attention to the olfactory hints in our visual, textual, and material sources. And just one final word. You may be slightly surprised to learn that certain jinns can be conjured up so easily with such basic spices that you surely all have in your well-stocked kitchens back home. But before you rush home to summon up your own personal jinn sisters, I need to remind you of a warning made by a 19th century resident of the Deccan, Jafar Sadiq, concerning the dangers of listening to those, like myself, who have only read about and not practiced magic. He writes, by doing so, many have injured themselves and becoming mad, have mixed up human offal and rubbed themselves with it, and wandered about in deserts and on mountains. You've been warned.
Taking us to the world of humans and jinns and court societies, all kind of entangled and embedded, absolutely delightful. I just have a couple of comments on the paper, and more in terms of, the kind of, issues that flow from this, rather than as a kind of, One of the interesting things that I read the paper, and as I was hearing you, Emma, speak, is the whole, the kind of dichotomy that seems to be emerging between the ephemeral, objects and items and products in this case, and the whole notion of a body that is the, reverse of that. And not just the body, but body actually in the early modern period representing body politic, which is, more kind of stagnant and stationary. And therefore, the continuous usage of the word, the transformatory, role or power of the ephemeral in this body and body politic. And flowing from that, the very, very insightful and very exciting idea about the transformations in ordering court societies through the ephemeral, product. I found that really interesting, and from that observation, there are two interesting, observations that flow. One is that, what would be the story if we saw this more as a kind of interactive dialogue between the ephemeral and the more, static, not really static, but more sedate kind of body and body politic. What would be the kind of picture that would emerge from there in terms of other kinds of texts that indicate this more interactive relationship between body politic, and perfumes and odors and smells, rather than just a kind of linear, kind of one-way transformatory aspect of it. So it would be interesting to hear from Emma a little more about some other texts which indicate new or different ways of writing or production about the production of ether or perfumes or odors or smells. So one is that. So the question therefore is, what are the other kinds of production processes involved both in the making of the text as well as in the making of these transformatory ephemeral products. The second very interesting idea that I found in the talk was the idea of the individual, and as again a kind of shift from the forefronting of the individual, and again ordering the cosmic, the ecological geography of the early modern societies, which is really interesting and which is, I think, very new, because generally we begin to talk about this kind of individual-centric ordering of the cosmos and the cosmic and an ecological geography in a much later period, from around the 18th century, not that early. And of course, the forefronting of the individual here as a kind of way of ordering and a kind of transition that is being made from God and the more divine ordering to an individual was particularly interesting. And then, of course, again from this flows the question, which is that can we see this shift somewhat reflected in some diverse kinds of productions, of textual productions that are happening in this period, and both in terms of the production as well as the diverse and different ways in which these such ideas are being consumed in society. And finally, I think what was really interesting again was, and that was again a kind of observation for teasing this a bit more, is the whole idea of temporality in this argument, that this very exciting argument that you are presenting, which is that, from the 15th to the late 17th and, dovetailing into the 18th century, there is really a very fine line between science, wisdom, medical wisdom, and the kind of, literature you are talking about. Not only there is a very fine line, but there are overlaps. But at the same time, as we move more into the late 17th and early 18th century, there are other kinds of what one can call more scientistic influences, which are really, demarcating these, these various genres of texts and literatures in a more sharpened, they're sharpening these kind of shifts. So one would like to know from Emma, that when we talk about, when we conflate these texts with texts of medicine and humoral theory and all of that, is it a neat kind of picture in the way, in which it was emerging, or are there contestations, are there other kinds of issues that are coming up as we move across centuries? Because you seem to be, the paper seemed to be moving from the 9th, 10th, and then into the 16th and the 17th, whereas in terms of these very thin lines between art, aesthetics, medicine, medicinal wisdom, these thin lines are not so, kind of rigid. They keep kind of shifting and shuffling. So I was just wondering if you can, have some comments on that. So basically these three questions, and you need not respond immediately. We can collect some more questions and hear from the audience, and then we can just...
Okay, so taking your first question, or your last question first, rather, on temporality, yes. I spread my net very wide. If you're writing about perfume, there isn't a nice, big cache of texts from 1570. It'd be great if there was, but there just isn't. So in trying to understand it, I have... partly it's practical. If I want to understand perfume, I have to look further back and further forward, and I have to look sideways. I have to include Malwa, because there was a recipe book from the Sultanate period, but it went missing. It was in Salajang, and who knows what happened to it. So I take great liberties with texts, and some people are very uncomfortable with that. But to write the kind of history that I want to write, the kind of history that can be written about Europe, but has so far not really been written about India, I feel like we need to start taking these liberties, otherwise we're going to just keep writing the same old histories. Not that they're not good histories, but if we're ever going to write different types of histories, we need to take these liberties. And so I unashamedly do take liberties. Yes, I look at texts from the 9th to the 16th centuries, sometimes even later, and they are from a very wide provenance. I've cited Moroccan, Egyptian, Iraqi, as well as Deccani sources here. But I also believe there's an intellectual, or rather historical reason why that's a valid thing to do. And that is because the individuals I'm looking at, my main work is on courtly culture, are courtiers who are educated in a classical canon of both literary and scientific texts. So these are not necessarily hakims, they are not specialists, but they are familiar with the classics of science. They're familiar with Ibn Sina. They're familiar with the humoral theory. Maybe not enough to practice medicine, but certainly enough to understand the way in which the application of perfume can interact with that. So, and I think that blurring of scientific influences, or the blurring of change in the scientific canon, for the work that I'm trying to do with it, I think is not so problematic. I wouldn't dream of trying to write a scientific history in the way that I've just done it, because obviously a lot of things are changing, and people who are trained in particular medical traditions, for example, would be would not need this kind of general, or would have far more than this general education that I'm hinting at. But what I'm trying to do is see how a courtier would have a kind of basic education that would allow him to, and it was usually a him, to move in particular ways and to manipulate the courtly world around him. So that's why I take those great liberties. The individual, the shift from the cosmos to the individual, or the divine from the individual, and your question is that, at least I think I understood your question right, that's generally seen as a much later shift, and I'm positioning it much earlier. One of the things that, when I first started trying to do the research I like to do, which is looking at courtiers rather than looking at kings, one of the things that really frustrated me was that there are no tazkiras, there are no biographical dictionaries of the Deccan. And I couldn't get over it. Why do we have them from Lucknow? Why don't we have them from the Deccan? And of course, it only came to me later that these kind of works, these kind of texts, were only produced at a later period when you have the strong sense of an individual biography. But that shift doesn't come out of nowhere. And I think what I'm getting at here is a world in which there begins to be seen, and it's a very, very gradual change, and not everyone is playing along with it. Obviously, there are going to be people who would entirely disagree. And all of the writers who talk about magic particularly talk about it, but say, well, you shouldn't do it, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway in the interests of omniscience. But you shouldn't do it. So there's of course a lot of pushback against it, but I think this shift from the divine cosmos towards the focus on the individual is something that allows the emergence of the individual later. But we tend to pinpoint the emergence of the individual in the 18th century and say it happened, and we forget about that long history before, and I think this is part of the process of it. Your first question, I'm not sure I entirely understood it. What other kinds of production and processes of texts and of products? Can you?
In a way, it was related to the other two questions, which is that, are the producers of these texts and their ideas the only way in which body and body politic is being transformed, or are the writing of these texts also being transformed as we go along because of the kind of ideas about ordering that they are, disseminating in society? Is it a two-way process, or is it just a one-way transformatory process? And if there are some other texts that indicate that it is a two-way process, I mean, that's not a question, that's just an observation, and maybe there are some other literature which would indicate that as these ideas are disseminated in courtly societies, the ideas of the kind of text you're talking about, they are consumed in certain ways, and the body and the body politic also then contributes towards, fresh and newer ideas about the transformatory role. And those can be reflected in some other kinds of literature that is being produced. That was the question.
I'll just say very briefly I get your point and I need to think about it. It's a very interesting way of thinking about it. I hadn't really thought about it in that way before, but just one thing immediately comes to mind. One of my other great sort of things I'm always going on about is the importance of metaphors and the importance of taking metaphors seriously. One of the other things I do is work on insha, which is a horrific, horrible Persian, well, it's wonderful actually, but everybody hates it, everyone thinks it's pointless, it's just highfalutin salutations and lots of complex metaphoric chains. And one of the things I'm trying to do is take those metaphorical chains seriously, because once you start taking them seriously, that's how you can get an awful lot more information about standards of courtly culture, ways of eating, ways of drinking, because these metaphors actually paint pictures, and I also would argue very firmly that that language has very, very strong transformative power. And so I think in terms of perfume, you see a huge amount of perfume metaphors. Mm-hmm. And instead of just dismissing them as just pretty little adornments, we need to take them seriously and think about at which moment in time is jasmine used and at which moment in time is rose used, and vice versa. Sure.
The stupas in the Deccan are all festooned with fresh garlands in their depictions. And Kevin Trainer, when he wrote Relics, Ritual and Representation, and a couple of articles prior to that book, was one of the first scholars who really pointed out that the rituals surrounding the stupa environs included the transformative nature of what happened between the profane space and beyond the Vedika when you entered the sacred space. And fragrance transforms that person. The Vedika is the threshold where you transform and you come into a different environment. So the iconography and the imagery of what is on the Vedika is meant to be that transformative space. And when you think of the kind of images that you have there, you have a class of beings that we call the Kinnara, the Vidyadhara, and the Gandharva. And the Kinnara, what man? Kim Nara, what man? Neither man, nor woman, nor beast, nor animal, what is this? Fantastical composite, transformative being. Vidyadhara, who brings knowledge, and knowledge which is the most transformative thing of all, transforming anyone. And of course, Gandharva, he who brings gandha, fragrance, that transforms. So the idea of imaging and creating an imagery for that transformative agent to be placed at thresholds and entrances to sacred shrines gets very well established, not just in the Deccan, but in the early monuments. And I just thought that that might be an interesting little footnote for you.
I had absolutely no idea, so thank you. That's really useful.
Thank you, Dr. Flatt, for that wonderful presentation. My question actually is on how and if do you look at perfume as a spatial element in the sense, and I'm going to sort of say it with a pad from Bihari who wrote the Satsai, and I'm translating here where he says that why, and he's addressing the Itra seller, the perfume rose perfume seller, and he's saying that why do you sell all your, all your wares here when these gawar, and he uses the term gawar, and not in a pejorative sense, but, to say these peasants actually, and there's there's an image with it where you can see all these village people doing, people doing their village chores, and they're doing their things, and so the question really is that do you come across examples of who, and on spatial terms, who can appreciate and who cannot appreciate? What he was trying to say there was that if someone is from the and this is not a singular verse, he has many other, which I'm not saying. Do you come across examples like that where space, exactly, no, don't waste, not only that, he's saying who will buy it here because they don't know what you're selling. They don't know, they don't appreciate, they don't have a sense of what you're selling anyway. So it's I don't know if it's...
Here is the market or the bazaar? Where
it's not about the bazaar as much as it's about the space where you're setting your bazaar in, where you're sort of going around. So perfume has like a... And then, methodologically, do you look at perfume and in a spatial manner?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure how to answer it. Because I don't know the poem to which you're referring. But definitely there is a huge spatial element to perfumes and the kind of rooms that should be perfumed. The bedroom, for example, is a really important room to perfume. I believe actually Ali Sabi is going to speak about perfume and space, so you probably have much more intelligent answers from him. In terms of spaces that can be perfumed, one thing that comes to mind, just talking about perfume bazaars, there's a beautiful illustration from, I think it's an 18th century version of Zuhuri's Sakinama, in which the bazaar is shown, but it's in the British Library, and I don't think it's been published, but the bazaar is shown, and all of the people in the bazaar are selling what look to me like perfumed olfactants. So there's definitely a sense in which bazaars and the selling of olfactants. I think in the National Museum there were the women smoking in the Nauras exhibition. There's the women who've set up a hookah place for the people who can't afford, and the lady looking down very disturbed by these low-class people who can't afford their own hookahs. So there definitely is something that can be said about it. I don't think I'm the person to say it because I haven't really had enough time to engage with that. So, but good question.
Sorry, I have two questions. The first one is when you mentioned the Portuguese travelers to the Ahmednagar court and the champa smell, it reminded me of the lament of this early British gardeners who say, and I paraphrase, that they say the Indian flowers are offensive. Either they are like blindingly bright in color, but whenever they have a nice color, they have this offensively strong smell. So, like as compared to British flowers, of course. So, so my question was about jasmine, and as we know that jasmine becomes very well appreciated in Europe as an Eastern exotic fragrance, and unlike sandalwood or musk, it's a perishable fragrance, so it doesn't travel so well. I mean, maybe in pre-modern times it's difficult to. So my question is, what are the historical and social and cultural factors which make a smell offensively foreign to exotically foreign? So that was
How long have you got?
And my second question is very short. I just want you to talk about the connection with the public bathhouses in Islamic world, the hammams, and the history of perfume you trace. Like, where do they overlap? So your comments.
Public bathhouses
And the perfume history in the Islamic world. So where do they overlap?
Next
All right.
paper.
So in terms of the bathhouses, I'm going to have to defer to the architectural and art historians in the room. My understanding is there aren't very many bathhouses in India. I could be wrong. The only one I know of, bless you, is the only one I know of is in Feroz. Okay, there are lots. I have no idea. Yeah, well, I don't know. They're two separate histories. Bathhouses, I thought I would find a lot about bathhouses in the perfume manual, and I didn't. So that is why, from the texts I've read, bathhouses are non-existent. Architecturally, clearly, I don't know. The second question, or the first question, what makes a smell exotically pleasant or exotically unpleasant? I don't have enough time to tell you. I mean, and I don't even know for each specific one. But one thing I think is very fascinating, and it's what Alain Corbin brings out, is the way in which musky-like perfumes in Europe at one stage are the height of the beautiful smell and then become, you know, the most embarrassing, awful odor, and anyone who wears it is an old, lecherous pervert. You know, there is this change over time, and it's connected to a huge amount of changes that go on in science and understandings of bodies and understanding of intimacy, etc., etc. What I find particularly interesting, though, and I think you're right, that one of the ways in which the colonial or early European engagement with India really sort of tried to otherize, sorry Susan, tried to otherize India was by describing Indian flowers as though they were in a kind of, they had too many bodily connotations. And I think that's a really interesting connection there. And I think that might be something worth pursuing.
I just had a question. This was regarding the huris, the different bodily parts associated with certain scents. And I was struck by a visual reference to that in terms of metaphorizing bodily parts with visual metaphors. So isn't there a close parallel between those two?
I'm not sure I understand.
For example, you have this tradition of the brows like the qiblas of the arches, and yeah. Yeah, the huris have metaphors of scents, of perfumes. So you have parallel metaphors. So isn't that just to
talking about huris, just equating them to scents, and isn't that related to the visual metaphors? Metaphorizing them with scents?
Yes, I would assume so. But I mean, one of the things that I'm trying to do, I guess the reason I got interested in this whole sense of smell thing was that, I should not say this in front of art historians, but I'm going to say it anyway. I wanted to get away from the visual. I feel like sometimes we spend all our time talking about the visual and seeing, to the detriment of other scents. And I wanted to try to write a history of ephemeral items that are no longer there, whose power wanes, I mean, they may last for a day or 2 days, or even 100 years, but their power, they're not as strong as they were. And I wanted to try and write histories of something that's ephemeral, that we have actually no physical evidence for, and we have to reconstruct it in other means. So my interest in this has been much more olfactory than visual. But I'm sure we could see it as it is a type of metaphor. I think we're very used to understanding visual metaphors. We're not very used to understanding olfactory metaphors, and I think that's my main point, really.
You know, in this very interesting talk that you gave, you didn't mention any centers of itra making, which have been well established and well documented. Like, say, Lucknow, which you mentioned, has Kannauj, and everything is sort of documented and how different itras were made. Could you please throw some light on that?
I've looked at this purely from a kind of an idea that, and I think at least the Malwa Nimatnama pictures help me in this, and the perfume manual that I've been looking at, an idea that at this particular point in time, making perfume was a courtly accomplishment. So yes, I'm sure there were established, probably long established centers of scent making, and in fact my colleague James McHugh has done a fabulous work, Sandalwood and Carrion. Do go and read it. It's wonderful, on the Indic traditions of perfume making, which is partly why I don't deal with Indic traditions of perfume making in my work, because James has done, and James has the skills that I don't have to do it, and he's done an awful lot of work on the different centers where particular techniques were used. What I was trying to do here was trying to say, look, this is a courtly text. This is a text that is presented to the Sultan. So why would a courtly text presented to the Sultan have recipes in it? And my argument, or my answer to that, is that the courtly elite weren't just consuming perfumes ready-made, produced in these other centers. They were making them themselves. And they were precisely making them because of all of the ethical and moral reasons that I've been trying to lay out. So I'm not denying that there are very important things to be said about those itra-making centers. I just don't know enough about them to say very much in length. But thank you for your question.
And thank you very much, both of you, for this fantastic session. Marvelous.